Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Captains of Industry. I'm Bronwyn Nielsen. The man in the hot seat this evening is Derek Wilcocks, CEO of Dimension Data Middle East and Africa. Derek, good having you in the studio.
Hello, Bronwyn.
You've been with Dimension Data, the group, since 1995. In fact, to be precise, you were the 12th employee of Internet Solutions.
That's right.
You've come a long way.
It
Have
has
you
been a long
enjoyed the journey?
I have enjoyed the journey. I've had tremendous opportunities and a lot of luck that's gone my way in my career, and that's brought me to where I am today.
May 2009, you took over from Alan Kaywood. It's a big position. Were you ready for the hot seat at that time? Of course, you were running Internet Solutions prior to the announcement that you would be replacing Alan.
I don't think one's ever truly prepared for a new job, but there's nothing like starting to get you in the hot seat, as you put it, quickly, and you certainly learn on the job very quickly.
You've also navigated through some very difficult economic environments, and before we deal with all the positive, let's go back to that period, the financial crisis, specifically 2008, 2009. What did you do in your position of leadership to make sure that you could keep the ship steady through that period?
I think first of all for us, it wasn't as bad as the dot-com bust back in 2002, 2003.
Of course, you had to navigate, so maybe we go back all the way to 2000.
Yes. So I think that's where Dimension Data really learnt, how to cope with very tough times.
Cut its teeth on the bad times.
Cut its teeth on the bad times. And although it was one of the most stressful times in my career, and we were busy restructuring divisions and very unfortunately retrenching people, which is something I hope to never have to do again, we were learning a lot and growing up a lot as a business back then. And I think when 2008, 2009 came, as a result of that learning, we'd positioned our business quite well. And we had a lot of annuity services. And those really kept us going, because those are contracts that keep paying no matter the economic circumstances, at least for a while. And secondly, we were able to scale back quite rapidly despite quite a strong fall off in our product-based business. And that really was just about being quick to respond. We didn't have to go through any retrenchments. But what we did do is we had a hiring freeze. We made sure that we cut back on discretionary expenditure where we could. And I think this time around we were very fast to respond. And that was our last real set of results that the public saw before we were bought by NTT. And as you may recall, they were actually quite a good set of results given the circumstances at the time.
How has NTT changed your life?
It's quite nice not to be listed.
You don't have the scrutiny of shareholders demanding engagements
on
a regular basis. Exactly. I'm sure NTT are keeping their eye on the ball.
Correct. NTT does demand performance, and they certainly have an objective in mind. But I think that what you've got is a single shareholder that can really look at a more medium to long-term vision. And I think the first thing that they've brought us is, for the first time in our history, we've been able to make significant acquisitions for intellectual property and not just to get scale or earnings. And we've made two major acquisitions in the United States over the last 2.5 years. One called Opsals, which is taking us into cloud computing, and the other one is called Zygo, and that's taken us into telephony expense management.
Into telephony expense management. Let's focus on the cloud computing for a moment. What is the future of cloud computing? Have we just scratched the surface of this animal?
I think we have just scratched the surface. I think it's very early days. I think a lot of people in our client base certainly are really grappling with what do they do with cloud computing. And although it's starting to make an impact and it's becoming something that is affecting every single CIO, it's not the mainstream of IT spend yet. So I think it's very much a time for people to experiment, to learn, and to have a look at how this impacts not only the technology side of their business, because in many ways that's the easy part, but also the human resource side, what kind of partnerships they have, how they contract with suppliers. And I think these are some of the more difficult things, because we have years and years of experience with the current computing model, the client-server computing model, and how you contract for that. But we're all learning our way in this new world.
Will cloud computing replace the client-server model?
I think it ultimately will. And I think that it's more than just technology. It's going to change the way in which people buy computing power, and it's going to deliver on this concept that you can buy computing as a utility or as you need it, rather than having to buy a lot of unused capacity up front.
Who's ahead of the game on the South African front when it comes to embracing the cloud computing? Obviously, within the bounds of being able to mention client names, but perhaps is corporate South Africa taking it seriously? Perhaps that's a better way to phrase the question.
I think corporate South Africa is taking it very seriously. What we are seeing is that there are a couple of companies that have very particular business characteristics, and those characteristics make them very well suited to cloud computing. So if I look at some of our global clients, we have a South African company, Mixed Telematics, in the vehicle tracking and asset management space. They've been very successful elsewhere in the world, almost entirely in the cloud already today from a computing perspective. We then have clients like Max Steel International, which is one of the world's biggest steel trading companies, really looking very aggressively at how they embrace cloud computing for the entire computing platform today. But I think those two businesses have very particular characteristics. They're both very global, and they both have relatively small operations without a lot of legacy that they have to take into account. For the vast majority of our clients, cloud computing is a journey. So it's something that they have to carefully consider what they have today. They can't afford to throw away everything they've invested in over the last 10, 15 years. So they have to keep that running.
Otherwise it's going to be a very expensive replacement cycle.
Very expensive, exactly. So they have to keep that running, and then they have to gradually bring cloud computing in. They also have very big IT departments and many existing contractual and outsourcing relationships with suppliers. And they have to evolve those in parallel with the technology evolution.
Telephony expense management, that's the other business you bought in the US, and I'm sure all those conservative accountants out there ears have pricked up in terms of how could that help them manage their telephony expenses?
Well, as you can imagine, a very popular solution in the current economic climate where everybody's looking to cut costs. And we picked up Zygo, which is one of the leaders from a Gartner perspective in the world of telephony expense management, really for a couple of reasons. First of all, they were the first company that we dealt with that brought together mobile and traditional fixed line voice expenditure. And as you'll know, for many corporates, mobile is becoming a very big part of the corporate voice expenditure. So corporates have put a lot of emphasis on getting fixed line under control, but mobile in many ways is spiraling out of control. You've also got new elements like mobile data that have come in through devices like tablets, your iPads, your Android devices, etc. And people are really struggling with how they use mobile data as a business tool. What does the company pay for? What won't it pay for? And really what we do is to give them the information through Zygo that helps them to exercise that control and make the right decisions.
Derek, what does a typical day in your diary look like?
Busy.
When does it start? And do you have meetings back to back? I'm always interested to get into the nitty-gritty of CEOs' diaries.
I generally speaking don't like to start before 8 in the morning because I like to spend some time with my kids in the morning and see them off to school, and I like to go running in the morning. But I do occasionally have meetings that start at 6 or 6:30 or 7, but I try and avoid them. So generally speaking, it starts off at 8. And from then on, it's pretty much back-to-back meetings. My favorite days are the ones where a lot of those back-to-back meetings are with clients. I enjoy spending time with clients.
Do you do a lot of client-facing engagement?
Not as much as I'd like to. I'd like to spend more. As you can imagine, the first 4 months has been quite internally focused, I have to say. So I'm probably seeing about 12, 15 clients a week at the moment, and I'd like to be seeing a lot more.
You're seeing 12 to 15 clients
Yes.
a week, and you only start at 8 o'clock. When do you end these client engagements?
Well, that's only 3 a day, and it's half an hour to an hour meetings, so those are...
All right, that puts it in perspective.
Yeah.
So first 4 months, have you made any big restructuring moves, changes that people have said, wow, that's quite a big one?
I'm very fortunate that I've come into Dimension Data in the Middle East and Africa at a time where everything is going quite well relative to the current economic situation. So I don't think that I've been under pressure to come in and make major changes. However, what we started out talking about, which is this move to cloud computing, is something that ultimately is going to have a tremendous impact on our business. And there's no doubt that over the next couple of years, we're going to have to learn how to gear up our whole business differently to meet our clients' needs for buying technology in a very, very different way, and more particularly the services around it. So we've appointed a number of teams. I'm a big believer in creating a sort of a learning organization, and we're starting to do some experiments with some teams that are cross-functional, that cut across different silos in our business.
And different geographies?
And different geographies. And also with some teams that are bringing in some of the younger talent in our business and getting their input. And you'll be very pleased to hear, Bronwyn, we've also made sure that we bring some women into those teams, because that's certainly something that I think the IT world is challenged by. And I think there are tremendous advantages to having diversity in learning approach. So those teams are now working on 6 main themes for us. And we're very excited about that.
If you look at your opportunity, your growth opportunity right now, across the territories that you straddle, Middle East and Africa, where's the biggest growth going to come from for Dimension Data?
Well, first of all, I think we're very fortunate that we are in one of the few places in the world today where there are actually countries where you're seeing real positive GDP growth, and arguably one of the best growth rates in the world. I do think it would be somewhat misleading, because for our industry what's most important is the rate of services growth. So pure commodities-led growth doesn't really drive a lot of IT spend. But the minute you get the services, the emerging middle class that comes behind that, the retailers moving into a country, the cellular providers moving into a country, and everything that follows on behind that, supply chains, logistics, etc., it has a tremendous positive impact.
How are you playing the African continent? Is there a regional play where you've got the West Africa focus, you've got the East Africa focus? Do you go as far as the Maghreb Union, SADC? Do you play it as regional blocks?
We're in 21 countries across Africa, across the Middle East and Africa, and you're quite right. We have Nigeria as our West African hub, we have Kenya as our East African hub, Morocco as our North African hub, and of course South Africa as our Southern African hub. And they all have satellite geographies that essentially hang off of them. When we started, our businesses were largely autonomous in these geographies, but we're now starting to build quite a strong central team that's not trying to second guess the in-country management, because that's something Dimension Data has always believed very strongly on, is having feet on the street close to where the clients are. But what it is focusing on is standardizing our offerings, because what we're seeing is that as your South African-based and global multinationals extend into Africa, they want a consistent service wherever they go.
We're going to a short commercial break. More with Dimension Data's Derek Wilcocks when we return. Don't you go anywhere.